Hey y'all, in this video we're going to be taking a look at solving inequalities using multiplication and division. So we want to be able to solve inequalities using multiplication or division. Some important things that we're going to talk about before getting into the lesson. The method for solving any one-step inequality is just like the method for solving one-step equations, like we saw similar in the last lesson. However, there is a difference. The only difference is when multiplying or dividing both sides of the inequality by a negative number, you are going to flip the inequality. Make sure you write down those words that are underlined. But you might ask why. Why do I need to flip the inequality? Didn't have to do that for equations. Well, let's take a look at the relationship. If negative x is less than 0, then what does x have to be? Well, another way to say negative or talk about negative numbers is we can say the opposite of. If the opposite of x is less than 0, then x itself must be greater than 0, because that's the opposite. So because a negative is an opposite, the opposite of a number will have the opposite relationship, less than or greater than, to the final result. So when we are multiplying or dividing by negative numbers, we end up making an opposite. So we have to change the inequality to represent the opposite relationship. Please make sure you pause the video to write down the essential question. Here it is, how is solving inequalities with multiplication and division similar to and different from solving equations with multiplication and division? So again, very similar to the essential question of our first lesson, but now dealing with multiplication and division. For our example, we're not going to take a look at a side-by-side of an equation and an inequality. We're just going to look at the difference between using a positive number and a negative number. So in this first problem, we can see we are solving x over 3 is greater than negative 2. And they want us to graph the solution. Well, we know that a fraction is division. So this is x divided by 3. If that's something you often forget, write that into your notes, that this fraction is really saying x divided by 3. That helps us see that what we need to do is multiply both sides by 3. So here we see multiplying both sides by 3, which gives us x on the left, and 3 times negative 2 is negative 6 on the right. Notice that even though we have a negative in our multiplication, we did not flip the inequality here, because we didn't multiply by negative 2, it was already there. We multiplied by positive 3. So keep in mind that just because you are multiplying with a negative doesn't always mean you flip it. It depends on what you are multiplying by. We can graph this by putting on our number line an open circle at negative 6, since we do not have the or equal to underneath. And then x is greater than, so we want to draw an arrow showing numbers that are greater than, which are to the right. Now let's take a look at the next problem. Solve negative 2m is less than or equal to 10 and graph the solutions. Starting off, we see that negative 2 is multiplying m, so to undo it, we are going to divide both sides by negative 2. And now dividing by a negative is going to reverse the inequality sign. So when we go to write our next step, you're going to see that we have m is greater than or equal to negative 5 instead of less than or equal to. We can graph this again by putting a closed circle at negative 5, since we have the line underneath the greater than, and because it's greater than, we are going to have an arrow pointing to the right. So it is very important that you understand that if you divide by a negative number or multiply by a negative number, the inequality symbol is going to reverse. So this changed from less than or equal to greater than or equal to. These 4 problems are for you to try. They just have you solve each inequality. You do not need to graph them. You just need to solve them. So pause the video now, take a moment to solve these, and press play when you're ready to see the answers. For the first problem, we get 5 is greater than v. For the second problem, we get m is greater than 12. For the third problem, we get x is greater than or equal to -5. And for the fourth problem, we get -3 is less than d. On the back side of your notes, where you're going to write your summary, I've also left you space if you would like to jot down any questions you have or anything particular you want to remember, such as our less than and greater than symbols and what they mean, so you remember exactly which one is the greater than and which one is the less than. Or if you wanted to jot down when to know if you're going to put an open circle or a closed circle when graphing an inequality. These are things you might write down in that space. But for now, let's take a look at our summary. Our summary is bulleted with 2 points. The first one being when we are multiplying or dividing with a positive value. So solving inequalities with multiplication and division is the same as solving equations with multiplication and division when the values are positive. Use the inverse relationship between multiplication and division to isolate the variable. So kind of to put that in a little bit less wordy way, if multiplying or dividing by a positive number, we are just using the inverse relationship, the inverse operation. However, when multiplying or dividing by negative values, we need to remember that the inequality symbol is reversed. These 2 pictures are just showing you what happens when we multiply by a positive or divide by a positive 2.5 versus a negative 2.5. In the first example, you see all of the symbols are the same. And in the second example, you see when they divide by negative, they turn that symbol around. Your next steps are to submit your 4.2 notes, complete your 4.2 practice, and then take your 4.2 mastery check. Good luck, and I'll see you in the next lesson.